Hello there, friendos. It's your old pal Chad Dukes, and this is my producer, Gigantor. If you're liking what you're seeing here on the Chad Dukes Show YouTube channel, well, we sure would love it if you'd click like on this video, then maybe hit subscribe. Hit that little bell thing. Isn't that what you do? You hit the bell, and then we spam your phone. We sure would appreciate it. And if you don't want to do that, well, then don't. Those seem to be the options. Take care.
This is Radiofile with Chad Dukes.
Welcome, everybody, to Radiofile. I am your host, Chad Dukes, Big Shooter. Yeah, this is a podcast that came together rather quickly, and I'm very excited for this first episode. So I'm a huge fan of P1s, is what they call us. I started off as a huge fan of radio and interned at WJFK at the time, and grew up listening to talk radio that really is difficult to find now. I mean, some of it exists on satellite, and there's some remnants on podcasts, but you know, as far as the FM dial and being able to sit in your car in your commute on your way to your job and have a show that is unfolding that isn't political talk or isn't sports talk, because I think those are the only two that are allowed right now, was stimulating, man. And these shows that kind of towed the line and pushed the agenda and really did some revolutionary things, and never really got the respect they should, because I think outside of, you know, your Howard Sterns and your Rush Limbaughs, people viewed radio as kind of a carny act. Now, that's not to say people didn't make a lot of money. And we were lucky enough here in the Washington, D.C. area, wherever you're listening to this, that we had some of the most legendary lineups of all time, and shows like Stern and Opie and Anthony and Don and Mike and the Greasemen and the Sports Junkies like Ron and Fez. We had all those. We got to listen to some of the best. I don't know if you would have called it guy talk or hot talk. I kind of found both of those to be somewhat dismissive, but there really isn't a great way to describe it. And, you know, to go through, I was working in the industry at the time when it went through like the biggest changeover I'd probably ever seen. That's, of course, Stern leaving for satellite. Then everybody in broadcast radio, they try to rebrand themselves. And the company that I worked for, you know, tried Free FM, and they went all in on that format of talk. And it was an unbelievable time. And some of the best radio I've ever heard took place then. And it doesn't get discussed enough. You can't talk about that on the radio show. I'm there to, you know, serve a mistress and provide a certain type of content. So a buddy of mine, Eric Nagel, who used to produce O&A, now works for the Compound Media, he's doing like radio documentaries where he's like interviewing Scott Shannon and interviewing Mike O'Mara, and did one on Big On Dukes, which of course was the midday show here on the mighty WJFK. And I was like, well, that's a really cool idea. And these big, you know, elaborate kind of produced pieces, and he works very hard on them, but they're slow to come out. I said, you know what? I don't know if it's a direct rip, but it's such a great concept. I'd like to do my own version of it. And it's going to be way more simple, where I think the formatics of the show are going to be somewhat like this. I'm sure I'll have stuff to talk about. There's segments that I'd like to recommend to you that maybe you haven't listened to or checked out. There's a lot of topicality and material online that you can find. The internet's both the most evil thing and the best thing that's ever happened to all of us. It continues to be so. But we're going to kind of let this thing unfold. The crux of it is going to be, each week I'm going to try to interview somebody that I found influential or that I think is an important figure. And, you know, it's going to be somewhat narcissistic. Like if you've got some legend in Cleveland radio that, you know, Rover's not going to be on this show because I just have never listened to his stuff. But, you know, in my own personal life, heavily influenced by these shows that I was just talking about there. And I'm going to try to get these guys on, and we're going to have conversations. And I'm sure the conversations will be a wide variety of topics, but what I mostly want to talk about is radio, not podcasts, radio. And there's a huge distinction between the two. I take a lot of shots at podcasts, even though I do a bunch of them, but I don't have anything necessarily against them. I think they're too easy to achieve. And I think that broadcasting is an art, and just sitting around in your basement with your friends, regardless of whether or not you're a professional comedian or you're Johnny Jerkoff, you know, in McLean, thinking, hey, I can do that. You don't really cultivate a skill doing that. Doesn't mean you can't be successful, broadcasting, man, it's a different animal. And by trying to incorporate a mass audience while still keeping true to your creative vision and pushing the agenda and envelope that you want to and towing the line, I mean, you can't do it anymore. You just can't do it anymore. You're not allowed. You have to have been established. And that's why the people that probably I'm going to speak to established themselves in that way on FM radio. Now, a lot of it transitioned to satellite. A lot of it still lives there. My guest today, still makes a good living doing a show for satellite. And I think that probably is the last bastion of hope. It's like dry land in water world, satellite radio, because you can still do a show like that. Whereas you'll have to point some out to me. I think there's a radio like The Bone. Is that still a station in Tampa, Florida? I don't know. They did a bunch of hot talk. I think maybe they still do. But all right, so today, this is episode 1, and there's a lot of people that could have been the first guest, and a lot of people I respect that I would have been honored, but the guy that's going to be on, I think, is one of the funniest people that I've ever encountered in my life, and one of the best comedians I've ever heard, and also is fabulous on the radio. And that's two different things, man. Like, it's different being funny on the radio than it is being funny with a mic in your hand. And I've heard lots of comedians go on radio shows and not say anything remotely entertaining. And there's probably been lots of radio guys that have stood up in front of a microphone, treading the boards, and stunk up the joint. But to be able to do both when they're so vastly different ways, one has a live audience in front of you. One, you really got to power through not getting much of a reaction at all. And if you've ever hosted a radio show and you've watched your producers trying not to fall asleep as you're doing a show, that could be soul-sucking. But this guy does both. It's Jim Norton, who I looked up to for a good long while and really think has done a tremendous job of keeping true to his humor and his comedy, and how much of it is just based on self-loathing and being self-deprecating. And I identify a lot with that, but also being able to pull off a really insightful interview, and also doing a show in 2020 where you still can be vulgar and over the top, but also continue to be professional and do a show in a climate which is incredibly different than the one when he started his broadcast career, much less when I started my broadcast career. So very happy. Of course, you can check him out, Jim Norton, on Twitter. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, the great Jim Norton. It is a brand new show. It is a show about my primary interest. Sports talk is fine, but talk radio, the way that it once was and the way that hopefully it still can be in other pockets of this society, is what the Radiofile show is all about. And I can think of nobody else that would be a better first guest on this particular type of program than Mr. Jim Norton, of course, Jim and Sam. Jimmy, thank you so much for doing the show. How are you?
I'm doing good, buddy. How are you?
I'm excellent. And, I've interviewed you, I think, for 700 different programs. You've always been very gracious, but this is a fairly unique time, I imagine, for you. Is your primary conveyance for, I would assume income is still stand-up, and going out and traveling and touring is something you do on a regular basis. How much more important has your radio show and your podcast become now that you don't have that kind of creative outlet?
It's driving me crazy not being able to go do sets, not even headline sets, just on the seller, just to work on material. I'm very happy to have the radio and UFC and to do podcasts. It's the only thing, like, you realize how lucky you are to be working when you're able to broadcast. Like, all these people who want to get back to work, the frustration of not doing stand-up is driving me crazy. If I couldn't do anything, I really don't know what I would do.
I've done stand-up, and I've made my living in radio for a while, and they're very different. I've always wondered, you're very good on the radio, and your good is kind of like that sniper capacity, but you can also host shows. I loved your advice show when you were doing that.
Thanks.
Creatively, how different is it? And I don't want to ask you which one you prefer, but do you think that if you were, you had a different career path, that you would still be doing radio, like being part of such a monstrous show and then being able to establish yourself as a broadcaster, a very unique thing? How do you compare and contrast the different ways that you're performing?
Well, radio is, I guess there's less pressure because you can't see if people are reacting. Like, you have an idea if you're funny or interesting, but half the times if I'm doing radio and I suck, I'm like, all right, well, I can convince myself I'm doing okay. On stage, there's no way to convince myself that I don't suck if I suck. Like, there's no way to convince myself that I'm doing well if I'm not, if the crowd is just staring at me.
That's got to be, and I don't know how you got. The times I've done stand up where it's not in front of people that like my radio show, and it's gone bad. It's a very unique type of pain, and it's like it's like a gut kick that I've never been able to quite tell people what it feels like when they ask me. How did you work past that? You were a comedian before you were a radio host. You know, as radio host, you kind of build this following, and you can insulate yourself into thinking, hey, my band is good, hey, my stand-up's good. You did it the reverse way. How do you get past that initial, oh, my God, these people are letting me know they don't like me?
It has to, succeeding has to be more important than the humiliation of failing. I mean, it's almost like having an erection difficulty in bed. You're still going to try to have sex again, even though you failed miserably. And if you keep failing miserably, eventually you're going to give up. And that's how it is with comedy. Like, you know, you get enough laughs that when you start bombing, you're like, okay, well, that's kind of a part of it. But yeah, it stinks, dude. And after a while, you get used to it, but it's never fun. And it never feels good, and you never stop blaming the audience. No matter what happens, I'll blame the audience. Literally, if I went up on stage and just did my jokes in reverse order and missed all the punchlines, I would still fucking blame the crowd for some reason.
Yeah, it's easier to do that.
Much easier.
I've done this. I've gone back and listened. Like I love radio fights, and you were involved in some of the greatest radio fights of all time. And you guys are with JV and Elvis and Don and Mike and just all these different. Yeah. The guy out in Cleveland. You ruined his life and put him
Maxwell.
Maxwell, and it's just I listen to these and they're so amazing. But have you had this happen? You deal with a bunch of degenerates in the comedic world and of course in the radio world as well. But I love all that stuff. I'm not offended by language. I'm not offended by humor, but I go back and I listen to some of it. And because we're so overly sensitive now and all of our entertainment is just so politically correct, I find myself, I don't know if cringing is the right word, but saying, oh my God, I can't believe this was on the air. Have you ever had that happen to you? Or are you kind of insulated because of the type of humor you were kind of associated with?
I mean, I'm aware of it in the sense, like, I'll hear old bits that we did, but I'm never like shocked. Like, oh, my God, I can't believe we did that. I'm almost like, well, couldn't do that one now. Nope, right. Couldn't do that one now. But in the moment, I remember the energy of the moment, and I remember what the culture was in the moment and the climate, and that stuff was, I mean, it was shocking and kind of dirty back then, but it wasn't as crazy back then as it sounds now, and I remember doing that stuff. So it was just about being funny. And, you know, look, we tried to be offensive sometimes, and we were very successful at being offensive. So, no, I know what you're talking about, but I more go like, I couldn't do that one now. Shit, that wouldn't work now. Like, right. More like sadness of what we can't do now as opposed to shock with what we got away with.
I've been one of those people that's been preaching since, because we, you know, when we were actually on the station that you were in Washington, D.C. when you guys were doing mornings and doing XM. And I've been kind of hoping that the circular thing, the cyclical thing that we've always been talking about is still something that can take place, where edgy radio, just talk radio, not political radio, not, you know, you still have there on SiriusXM, but you know, that seems to be the only place that it exists. And I'm not talking podcasts, I'm talking radio. Have we buried that corpse? Are we now resigned to the fact that there's never going to be a time again where that can exist on the broadcast radio waves?
It will never come back. You know, it's funny. Colin and I have been talking about this since the Tough Crowd days, and we both, every once in a while, one of us will get optimistic, and the other one has to point out how stupid the optimism is. It will never go back, because people who are older in our 40s, we defend it, but people that are coming up don't defend it. They don't value, like, hey, being offensive is good because at least you're speaking your mind or saying what you want. Like, they literally, the idea of free speech is changing. So, no, it will never go back, because the younger people are the ones who push social media more. They dictate the tone a lot more than guys in our fucking 40s. We just sound like a bunch of complaining, bitter old fools. Right. But it will never go back, dude, because but what's going to happen, the good part is, like, all the young, like, woke people who are protesting and happy that, you know, people are getting in trouble, whatever the giant dick for them culturally is hasn't arrived yet, but it will. In 20 years, the people who are enjoying this now will be taking a giant dick and complaining about it. So they will suffer the same fate we are with the shit. they like.
Do you think it's going to be like, I mean, I remember when glam rock was happening and everybody's dressing up like chicks, and then all of a sudden it's Nirvana and everyone's wearing flannel and they're grungy and angry. Is radio going to have that type of renaissance or that type of pushback just when the people you're talking about, they're, being pushed by a generation that doesn't like how, banana milkshake everything has become?
What do you mean? Do you mean will who push back? Will the older people push back?
I'm saying like when glam rock was taking place, glam and everybody had big hair and they're wearing tights. People got sick of that. It was saccharine, and then you had grunge rock, and then you had you had harder stuff, more angry stuff, more emotional, truer things. And I just feel like that happened in music. I don't know why that couldn't happen in radio as well.
Well, what happens is, but it does happen. The problem is they see us as fucking glam rock. Like the young people see themselves as Nirvana, and they are angry. Like the misconception is that this generation is soft. They're vicious. This generation is fucking vicious, and they're unforgiving. Like there's no room for mistake. There's no taking into account context. It is just literally, we got you, and we're going to cancel you, and we're going to ruin you. So this is young and angry. It just doesn't seem young and angry because they're not embracing offensive humor or offensive speech. But they are absolutely vicious. Their viciousness just comes out a different way.
You're right. It's like a revolution of conformity. It's like you're no longer letting a freak flag fly. You got to be careful with that. I don't want to get drummed out of the business. You're literally revolting by being Big Brother, by being this thing that censors you in your personal and professional life. And if you slip up in your personal life, that is no different than if you have a bullhorn in front of the White House. That is a very, very weird juxtaposition between the way it used to be, where you always thought that it was the older people that were going to try to censor you that way. Right.
Well, you know what it is younger people always hate older people's ideas. And anything people who are older hold together or hold like dear, young people think absolutely sucks. So that's why the fact that older people like certain speech and value certain things, younger people like, fuck you shouldn't be able to say that. It is funny to hear younger people complaining about what older people say, but I mean, that is the way it is. It's just, I guess, the nature of being rebellious, or hating what came before you.
Sure. You mentioned Tough Crowd, Jimmy. I love that show, and you watch that show now, you watch the cast, you're like, man, I cannot believe all you guys were sitting together there, and it wasn't, people filling up a stadium to watch it. It was a show on Comedy Central. Did you bring, because what that turned into is on Opie and Anthony, Voss comes in, Patrice comes in, all these guys come in, and you're just vicious to each other. Which was first? I know that happens between comedians behind the scenes, but did Tough Crowd influence the environment on O&A or vice versa?
It was kind of a bit of both. It's almost like kind of like an immersion from both ways. I guess the comedians doing it came first because we would always stand outside the Comedy Cellar Boston Comedy Club and attack each other. And this is like 98, 99, 2000, before I was a regular on Opie and Anthony. Opie and Anthony, we kind of brought that with us, like the whole thing of watching each other's tapes. We did that in like 2001, I think it was that we watched my tape and we watched one of Voss's old tapes and then just shredded it. I think it was Colin, Paul Mercurio, Voss, and Patrice attacked me on my old tape, and I forget who it was that attacked Voss. But like that type of shit we started doing just as comedians. Then you bring it to the radio, and then you bring it to Tough Crowd, and then Tough Crowd comes off, but then the radio show comes back, so it just kind of continues, and it gets more intense because A, you're doing it longer, and B, you're doing it in front of an audience now. Like we used to shit on each other, it was just in front of other comics, but then all of a sudden we're on the radio, and now all of a sudden we're on Tough Crowd, and then back on the radio, so now you're shitting on each other in front of people. So that's all that was, but the actual guys doing it to each other came first. It had to.
The Ron Bennington.
By the way, not to interrupt you, Chad, but that's why a lot of these other shows don't feel the same. Like, a lot of these other panel shows where they have a bunch of comedians doing bits, and none of it seems really natural or like genuine emotion, is because they're taking guys and putting them in a situation. Most times they're not guys who have interacted a lot. But with the radio show and Tough Crowd, the base of those shows was guys who knew each other really well. and had interacted a lot. So the kind of attacking back and forth and the discussion was natural.
I mean, you're describing, I know you're friendly with our morning show, the Sports Junkies, and what you're describing is...
I love those guys, yeah.
Yeah, their show is, they grew up together. They went to school together. They know each other's parents, and people have said, all right, let's put 4 guys in a room and have them talk sports. You can't do it. It's like PTI, part of the interruption with Wilbon and Kornheiser. It's like, well, let's just get 2 journalists to talk about sports. Those guys have known each other for 40 years. Like, you can't just rekindle that.
Right, and it's why something like the Practical Jokers works, because those guys are like legitimately friends. So like the bullshit and the attacks and the goofing on each other, whatever makes them so popular is natural. Yeah. And people can kind of smell if it's fucking bullshit, dude. People can sense if you're full of shit, Sometimes they sense incorrectly, but if your entire relationship with your people around you is bullshit, people will sense that.
Well, at this point in your career, so you're on Netflix, you got the popular radio show, you're in Scorsese movies, you're friends with the president's son. Like, you're at this is rarefied air. I heard Bennington call you the modern day Sam Kinison, and to me, there's no higher compliment. What I would ask is, O&A was such I call it an Armageddon show, a doomsday show, where it was like here to end all things, and it blew up so many different times and so spectacularly, and you were there from syndication on. You're a part of this entity. I'm curious, you're working hard as a comedian, you're grinding, you're going out to auditions, you clearly were going to find success, but where did being a part of that show, how much did that help you be where you are now, and how much of it was just your chops and your talent and your work ethic?
Well, first for Ron to say that is really nice. Although I think he probably just hopes that I have the same luck in a car as Sam did. But yeah, I don't agree with that assessment. I think it's very kind, and I'm not being fake humble. But Kinison was just a different breed. But I mean, Ron has always been very kind to me. The radio show did so much for me in every way. It made me funnier. It made me faster. Made my mind, because you got guys like Patrice and Bill Burr, and all these guys, and Anthony going back and forth and hitting each other. So your mind had to always move and always move and always move. So I would say the majority of success I had came from that radio show, a huge percentage of it. And even stuff that wasn't directly from the show came from me being elevated because of the radio show. So the radio show really was at the guts of all of it. And, of course, right before that, it was Dice. So Dice and the radio show were the 2 biggest things in my career. HBO, Netflix are amazing. Tonight Show was great. Jay was good to me. But those 2 are the main things in my career.
When you hear somebody doing a big fake voice and a big fake shtick on the radio, I used to always love it when you would get your hands on guys like that and you hear the puking voice. The disingenuous nature of radio before whatever that, I hate shock jock, but whatever that revolution was that you guys were such a huge part of, I wonder how difficult it was to fight through that. It's like almost like Brandau, like just acting on stage instead of doing some sort of bizarro caricature. He kind of had to cross that precipice. How do you think that we were ready for finally reality taking place in front of everybody via the radio, as opposed to this, gonzo morning zoo garbage that we were subjected to for so many decades?
I don't know. I don't think anybody thought that we were ready or not ready for. I don't think we thought about it when we were doing it. Like, we knew it was different than what other guys were doing, especially as it went on, and the more the comedians came in, and and then doing Jocktober and all this shit. But in the moment, you're really just trying to be funny. Like, I used to go into work every day. I'd be really excited because, again, it didn't fall on my shoulders. It was Opie and it was Anthony. So, like, me just kind of coming in and firing out jokes, I never really knew what to expect. I would just kind of walk into work every day not knowing what to expect and just reacting. I'd really think it through as to what it was. And, I see a lot of guys now doing podcasts and doing their internet shows and stuff. And look, I think it's great. It's amazing how many of them, like, now all of a sudden hate Opie and Anthony. And it's like, come on, man, one of the reasons you're doing what you did or do is because of Opie and Anthony. Like, you don't have to like the guys, but to act like Opie and Anthony, that show didn't somehow blaze a path for you, and to act like the Opie and Anthony show didn't make a certain type of humor very prevalent is crazy. And we always fought this whole gotcha thing, this whole let's nail this guy. Like, we made fun of shit, but we never tried to get people in trouble. You know what I mean? We weren't babies trying to get people we were just mocking people and shitting on them and then moving on.
I can't believe how many years ago I remember you guys doing the fake apologies and like playing the fake apologies on the air, and I just thought that was a passing fancy, and now it's 5, 6, 7, 8 years later, it's 1,000 times worse. I tell you, who's the opposite of what you're talking about, Jimmy, is Rogan. I mean, Rogan's the biggest whatever in the world, and he can't say enough that the reason why he wanted to do that is because of what you guys created in that studio when he would come in and visit the radio show.
Yeah, Joe has been he's been really, really nice about it. And his podcast was started, he directly credited Anthony with that because Anthony set up the compound at his house. But Joe has always said that when he came in, he loved what was happening. The fact that it was real conversation and not shtick and not do a bit. It was kind of like, in a way, daily podcasting. And a big part of that was the ability to do it on satellite radio, where we could, do the fucking Mel Gibson tapes or the Pat...
Christian Bale. Christian Bale.
No. That was all. No, Pat, the guy from Entertainment Tonight. Betsy, Pat. I want to eat your pussy. Wink at Betsy. Do you remember his tape? He was drunk.
Of course. You guys did that for weeks.
What's his name? Hold on. I'm going crazy. I'm looking it up as we talk. Pat O'Brien, because it was going to drive me nuts. But yeah, we were able to do that uncensored because I think Howard was even still on regular radio when that happened. So we were able to take those, and I think we were in Washington, D.C. when we first played either those tapes or the Mel Gibson ones. But I think it was those tapes, and we went crazy with those fucking Pat O'Brien tapes. But that was the beauty of the long form of satellite, is you could do, like, literally do a bit for an hour with no commercial.
I know you do the Chipperson podcast, and that just came back after a brief hiatus, and I did want to ask you about that. But do you like podcasts? I don't. I like radio. I like knowing something's happening as I'm listening. I like the ability to pick up a phone and call in. For some reason, why I can't tape a football game and watch it later. Like, they're okay, but I'm surprised at anyone that would prefer that way of communicating as opposed to something that's happening in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, like I there's none that I listen to. Like, I mean, even if I do Rogan Show, I don't listen to myself on it. Like, I don't listen to any podcast really. There's so many of them. I think the difference is that with podcasting, and there are some amazing ones, but anyone can do a podcast. Anybody can't do a radio job. So overall, you probably have. And again, maybe not at this point, but for historically, you probably had people that were at least good at making something move on a radio show because they had to do that every day to be employed. Whereas a podcast, you can just kind of put it up. But I think we're at a point now, dude, where podcasts are overall probably better. Like, there's more interesting podcasts than there are radio shows. I don't listen to regular radio either. And if I had to listen, again, if it's a guy like you or it's a guy like the sports junkies, Toucher and Rich or Johnny Dare, guys that I know are funny and who do like a real show, that's different. But I think that the shows you're talking about are shows that are like, there's not many shows like you behind you. Do you know what I mean? Like, sure. There's not a whole lot of new ones coming up. They've all got into podcasting.
Well, I think Sam's a couple years younger than me, and I think that's probably where you draw the line. I mean, there's no farm system anymore, and if there are, it's what you were saying. They're listening to, Barstool instead of listening to
Barstool.
Radio.
Yeah. And Sam is probably a couple years younger than you, but Sam looks 35 years older than you. That's the beauty of it. Sam looks like he's 71 years old and dyes his hair.
Just killing him, just murdering him right here. Hey, talk to me about the walkover. You guys had people attack you. There was the homeless stuff. There was the cake stuff. Did you like that as it was happening? For those people that don't know, the Opie Anthony and Jim used to walk over from the broadcast radio station in New York to the satellite radio station, and they would physically broadcast walking in the streets. First of all, it's the craziest thing I've ever heard of. I've never heard anything like it ever since. Nobody's even bothered to rip it off because it's so nuts. Was that something you enjoyed as a performer? And insanity would take place nearly, at least on a weekly basis. Like, how did you prepare yourself for that portion of the show?
I loved it. To me, the walkover was great because it was the end of the regular radio part of the day. K-Rock had its advantages. It got us some good guests, and it was a huge platform, and there was a big money jump. But I always fucking hated doing that because, again, we couldn't curse. We had to take commercial breaks. And the commercials were nice once in a while, but it made the show an hour longer. Instead of going 6 to 10, we went 6 to 11. So the walkover was great, dude, because that was like the beginning of Uncensored, which I always enjoyed a lot more, was the uncensored part, obviously. And the walkover was fun because you would see the same fans show up. And I loved it. I loved seeing the fans show up, and they were really good to me. I enjoyed it. Crazy shit would happen. But it was fun, and even in that moment, I knew this was fucking great. Just enjoy this.
The one thing that I admire about what you're doing now, Jimmy, is your show has evolved. It's not Opie and Anthony, but I think you do a good job of making it something different with what you have with Sam, but also keeping some of the edge, which seems to be very difficult to do. I know you don't have any ill will towards Howard Stern, and of course, I grew up listening to Howard Stern. I'm a fan of his show, but I don't listen to it at all anymore, and I'm not even mad at him about it. There's something admirable, I think, about evolving and changing what you are, but that show it has nothing for me any longer. I'm curious, as someone that works with the guy and sees, who goes in and out of there, what do you think about kind of the evolution of his career?
I never listened to Howard. I just know what people have said about it. Like, I've heard clips here and there, but I think that a part of it is, a lot of people act like these changes we go through are conscious decisions. Like, people will go, "You fucking changed, man. You're a pussy. You don't." But it's almost like if you're still doing the same thing you were doing 20 years ago, people yell at you for that. Yeah. They're like, "You've never evolved. You've never changed. You're doing the same angry shtick." Like, you can't win. And I think whatever is natural is okay. Like, I'm not as angry as I used to be. I can't be. If I'm 51 and I have the life I have, and I'm still as angry as I was when I was 35, then I'm a fucking idiot. Like, and Howard's the same thing. It's like, after a while, he's got a hot wife. He's worth, $500 million. He's probably just like, yeah, you know what? I want to just kind of interview celebrities a couple days a week. And I think that's just what he wants to do. So to me, you're only f***ed up if you're really not doing what you truly want to do and you have the ability to do it. Like, do you understand what I mean? Like, as much as I would love to do the kind of show Opie and Anthony did, even if we had Opie and Anthony back in the room together, you could never do that show again because the culture is just too different. Do you know what I mean? Like, so if he's evolved because he feels like evolving and it's just a natural thing for him, it's not like something he made himself do, then I got no problem with it because he's 61 or whatever, he's 65, whatever. Like, he should be thinking differently than he did when he was 40.
Has there ever been, and I agree with you on that, I have contractually worked into my contract as a one-market zilch the ability to do a podcast that my company doesn't own a piece of. I would imagine your company
great.
Does. It is, and it's rare, but you and Anthony and Ron Bennington, why has there not been a concerted effort that outside of Bennington, outside of Jim and Sam, outside of whatever's going on at the compound, the three of you in a room doing something into microphones together, why has there never been more of an effort to do that?
Honestly, I miss Anthony every day. I miss and Ron and I never had a show together, but I love Ron.
Yeah.
The reason I didn't go with it, first of all, it's funny. This question was raised at first. Well, if you loved Anthony so much, why didn't you go with it after your contract was up? And the answer is because I always wanted him to come back.
Yeah.
I wanted the Opie and Anthony show. Like, even when Opie and I were into it for a few months, I always wanted Ant to come back. I was always like, I wanted it to be the way it was. I didn't want to leave. Leaving to me, XM, besides the fact I like the money and the security, I like having a job. It was like, if I leave, then it's really over. And I always had hope that he would come back until things completely fell apart and you knew that wasn't possible. I'm not allowed to do I can do Chip. And believe me, Chip really did hold up mine and Sam's contract.
I love that.
But I'm not allowed to do a Jim Norton podcast. So for me to collaborate on anything outside the show, I'm not allowed to do it contractually. That's why I haven't. Because to think that I wouldn't do something with Anthony, and the reason I didn't just go to his network is I love that he's got his thing, but it's a closed-in environment.
Yes.
And doing live shows, I have to depend on people. Like, they'll never stumble on you on satellite the way they used to on regular radio. But the promotion for my live gigs, like, there's a lot more for me than just doing radios. I have a live performance career, and it's harder for me to be in an enclosed environment that is subscription-based. That's a smaller enclosed environment. That's also a big part of the reasoning.
Yeah, I don't, anyone that's actually questioning you for that just doesn't understand the nature of the business and the paywall. I mean, God bless Anthony. He's been able to make a wonderful living doing it. I subscribe to Compound. Like, you make your money that way. But when you have that paywall up, how's anyone going to stumble across you? I mean, you're literally just broadcasting the same people over and over again. And if you're trying to get somebody in Poughkeepsie to buy a ticket to a comedy show, they're going to be much more likely to be a Sirius subscriber than any podcast in the world. That's no disrespect to Kumia.
Yeah, and that's also, people forget, like, I make a good living, but I never made Opie and Anthony money. Like, I don't have the ability to just kick my feet up and not work again. Like, I have to work. I mean, and again, I love it, and I have a nice apartment, and I'm happy where I'm at in my life. But if I don't work, I'll lose that. So for me, there is no option but to continue working, and money has to be a consideration. And it isn't out of greed and fuck everybody, but I didn't make all that money. I didn't make anything in the same stratosphere as those guys did. So, I don't have a bank account saved up like that. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
For me, I have to make sure that, I have enough to pay my apartment off.
Jimmy, we talked about Chip. I remember listening to Jim and Sam when you kind of said, I'm done with this. And it wasn't that you were done creating or with the character. It was that I've had this experience a couple of times where the second you start feeling like you're dragging people along in a project, nothing sucks your energy and your zeal for that project as much as that happens. That's right. And I've ended podcasts I loved because of that. How did you get back on track? What is it like? I mean, I'd love for you to give context to people that maybe have never felt that, on how draining that can be for a creative process. The idea, like, people who like it really like it. It's got like a bit of a small cult following, but it was like one of those things where I didn't see it really going anywhere. And I'm like, I have to always try to get people, can I do my podcast? And then there were so many technical issues. I'm just like, what am I doing? Like, it's fun to do, but once you have to do it, I would at least like it to feel like it's being moved forward, or that technically it was moving in the direction I wanted it to. And when those things weren't happening, I was like, what am I doing? Like, and it wasn't for just to make people go, come on. It wasn't that at all. I was just kind of done doing it. And we're on a lockdown now, and I still like doing this whole character. So, I mean, I did a couple of podcasts. I might do another one this week, but I like that there's no pressure with it. There's no, I don't have to do it if I don't want to. So it feels a little more fun now because I don't have to do it. I'm not mandated or obligated to do it every week. I tell you what I like is your boss over for your other podcast, Dana White. I don't want to be insensitive or disrespectful to people that have been affected by Corona, but I got to say, his double middle finger, fuck you, pay me, I'm going to do whatever I want attitude. It's, even if it doesn't work, it's so refreshing in this kind of lecture state that we're in now, where all the people that have been lecturing us for months are emboldened because they've got this scary virus behind them now to tell you, I'm gonna fly a drone over your house and make sure you're not out in the front yard talking to the neighbor. I love that Dana's just kind of sparring with everybody about this. Yeah,
and he wants to get the UFC back, and he's willing to do it safely. Like that, I don't think there's anything wrong. Like, the protesters drove me nuts, not because they want to work, but because a lot of them aren't wearing masks and gloves. It's almost like they're going, the virus is not a real thing, but it is a real thing. And it's like, if it only affected that person, I wouldn't give a shit. Like, I don't care what, like, I was all for Dr. Kevorkian and people doing what they want to do. But it's like with something like this where you can spread it, and then you want to make a point, at least make the point with the face coverings and gloves. Like, at least acknowledge that you're not going to get other people sick. You know what I mean? So it wasn't what they were fighting for that I objected to. It was kind of the way they were doing it. Yeah. Like, hey, you guys are pussies if you believe this virus thing. It's like, come on. Yeah, I do believe it. I know people who've had it, and we all do. So, what was your question?
Look, I'm with you, and I don't want it to sound like I'm, running around kissing people on the mouth. What I'm saying is, I like that a president. I mean, can you imagine Roger Goodell or Gary Bettman or any? I just love the fact that people have been telling him to stop swearing and conforming, and now he's in bed with Disney, and he's still the same dude. I just love that. Yeah, well, that's what I like too, because to me, that's one of the reasons the UFC became so successful. Is because guys like Goodell, like when all the fans are booing him, this asshole just plows ahead like everybody loves him. Whereas Dana will go up there after a main event and go, all right, look, that fight sucked. Like, he'll tell you what he really thinks. And I think he's always done that. And now, look, he's trying to make something work. 249 didn't work out. And he said, all right, look, they asked us not to. Disney came down. We respect them, so we didn't do it. Now he's trying to do Fight Island. Like, he's pretty honest about the process.
which I think is really what's so refreshing about him. So, yeah, I love him. I love working for him.
All right, I've kept you too long. I wanted to ask you about one specific sequence of events. Steve Carlisi. Whenever Steve Carlisi, God rest his soul, was on, and you were able to do the voice, and you and Anthony were going back and forth with when he. I gotta say, I don't like to plug YouTube as far as a place where it steals content from radio shows and puts it up there, but there's a video called Steve C. and the Mondays Conspiracy. And it's him taking, and I hope you remember this, he was taking Mondays off for the foreseeable future and so forth.
For the foreseeable future, yes. A man of leisure, yes.
The beating that you guys laid on him for trying to pull that off. I have listened to that 700 times, and I laugh about it to this day. Did that one stick with you? I hope that one stuck with you.
It stuck with me, I really loved Steve. Like even we were off the air and I did a couple of CDs, Steve was involved in helping me put them together. So I had a really long-term relationship with him. So I can't really listen to any stuff. But did it stand out? Yeah, of course. Once in a while, the whole, whether it's That's How You Executive Produce or, calling him a man of leisure. I remember, for the foreseeable future when he couldn't get his piece of shit Prius out of the snow, but everybody else seemed to make it in. He was such a character. Steve C was such a character. Really, really miss him as a person. He was a really good guy.
I've become very close friends with Eric Nagel. He's just one of the nicest people I've ever met, and I always feel bad because you called him when he was on his honeymoon, and you were speaking in a calypso voice about how he had so many bowls of ice cream stacked up against the door that none of the other patrons of the hotel could get a bowl. And just aching belly, there will never be another entity where there's a person that really has done nothing wrong that just gets eviscerated for 90 straight minutes. I can't tell you how enlightening and enjoyable that was.
Is that when Anthony was making the whale noises? Is that when Anthony was making whale noises? That's what I remember from that was Anthony's whale noises.
You don't remember saying you said he's got to take 2 puka shell necklaces and sew them together to get around his fat neck. It was one of my favorite lines. Maybe laugh or death.
I don't remember. Oh, thank you. I don't remember any of that. No.
It's tremendous. All right. Well, look, if I'm doing a podcast about radio, having you on makes all the sense in the world, and really appreciate you doing this, Jimmy. It's at Jim Norton. Of course, Chip's coming back. We don't know for how often or how long, but people might be able to expect a new episode. Did I hear that correctly?
I think I'll probably do one this week. I texted Anthony. He's available. So I got to get a couple of more people. But, I'll see if anyone else can do it as well.
I look forward to that. And then, of course, Jim and Sam still broadcasting. Check them out, SiriusXM. Jimmy, as you can tell, I'm a huge fan. Thank you so much for the time, buddy. I greatly appreciate it.
Hey, anytime, man. I appreciate it. And thanks, Chad. Good luck with it. I'm glad you're doing it.
I am too, man. It's going to be a lot of fun, and hopefully we can get you back on again at some point. Radiofile, everybody. First episode in the books is Chad Dukes with Mr. Jim Norton. My thanks to Jimmy Norton, no better first guest for this show, and gotta thank everybody that's already given me feedback. I mean, before there was even an episode, when I just announced the project, so many people reached out to say they love the concept, they can't wait to hear it, and I think a lot of that had to do. I gotta thank Cakes from the Junkies and EB from the Junkies here locally on the Sports Junkies radio show. Since the stupid COVID stuff has been happening, they've put us together on the weekends where hosts are being reconfigured and combined, and I got a chance to do some radio with those two guys the past couple of weeks, and brought on I said, hey, look, we're working for free on the weekend, we might as well do some fun stuff. And Anthony Cumia was on the show, the great Ron Bennington was on the show, Michael Mara was on the show, and those interviews went really well, and I think that I'm going to try to incorporate those. If you didn't get a chance to hear them when they happened on this podcast, maybe that'll be episode number 2. You can hear those guys while we were doing those weekend shows.